Most plants need something from the gardener: water, soil, time, attention. This one asks for nothing. It grows in the cracks between sidewalk slabs, in the gravel beside driveways, in the dried-out corners of vegetable beds where the hose barely reaches. It grows flat against the ground, as if it already knows the sun will be brutal and has decided to make peace with it. Most people who encounter it do not stop to look. They reach down, pull it up by the root, and discard it. Gardeners treat it as an obstacle. Farmers treat it as a competitor. Homeowners treat it as a sign that something has gone wrong. What very few of them know is that gram for gram, this plant contains more omega-3 fatty acids than almost any vegetable on Earth. So here is the real question. If this plant is that nutritious, if it grows without any help, if it returns season after season whether you want it to or not, why did we all agree to call it a weed? Some knowledge was never lost. It was simply waiting to be remembered. In this film, we will follow purslane across 3 continents, trace how it fed ordinary families for thousands of years, and examine why a plant that practically grows itself has almost entirely disappeared from the modern plate. The plant has a scientific name that most people have never heard and would not recognize: Portulaca oleracea. It belongs to a family called Portulacaceae, a group of succulent plants adapted to survive in conditions that would kill most leafy greens. It is a low-growing annual, rarely taller than a few inches, with thick, fleshy stems and small, paddle-shaped leaves that hold water the way a cactus does. In the height of summer, when the air is dry and the soil cracks under your feet, purslane stays green. It stays hydrated. It stays alive. This is not accidental. Purslane uses a specialized form of photosynthesis called CAM, or crassulation acid metabolism, the same system used by succulents and cacti. Most plants open their pores during the day to absorb carbon dioxide, losing enormous amounts of water in the process. Purslane opens its pores at night instead, capturing carbon dioxide in the cool darkness and sealing itself shut during the heat of the day. It is a plant that figured out how to photosynthesize while barely breathing. The result is a plant that can thrive in temperatures and conditions where lettuce, spinach, and most other leafy greens simply collapse. It does not need irrigation. It does not need fertilizer. It does not need shade. It needs almost nothing, and in return, it produces something remarkable. The archive of purslane's human history stretches back thousands of years, and it reaches across regions that had no contact with each other. In ancient Persia, purslane was eaten fresh in salads and cooked into stews. Persian medical texts from the 10th and 11th centuries describe it as a cooling herb, useful for calming excess heat in the body. The great Persian physician Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, mentioned it in his Canon of Medicine as a plant with specific uses in managing digestive complaints. In the Mediterranean, purslane appeared regularly on tables from Egypt to Greece to the Ottoman Empire. Greek and Roman writers documented it. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century, noted that purslane was eaten across the Roman world, sometimes raw, sometimes cooked, sometimes preserved in vinegar. The Roman writer Columella included it in his agricultural writings as a garden plant worth cultivating. In North Africa and the Levant, it was pickled, dried, and stored. In Turkey, a dish called semizotu, which translates simply as purslane, is still made today with yogurt, garlic, and olive oil. It is an old recipe. No one knows exactly how old. In Mexico and parts of Central America, purslane was part of the diet before European contact. The Nahuatl-speaking peoples who built the Aztec Empire knew it as verdolaga. They ate it cooked in stews and salsas, and the tradition never fully disappeared. In parts of rural Mexico today, verdolaga is still sold in local markets. It is still cooked with pork and green chilies, a combination that has been prepared in some form for centuries. What is striking about purslane's history is not just how widely it was used, but how independently it was discovered. Cultures separated by thousands of miles of ocean and land arrived at the same conclusion. This plant, which grows without invitation, is food. The knowledge never disappeared. It simply moved to the margins. Now let us talk about what is actually inside this plant. Purslane contains alpha-linolenic acid, an omega-3 fatty acid that most people associate with fish oil or flaxseed. For a leafy green vegetable, the concentration is unusual. A 100-gram serving of raw purslane contains approximately 400 milligrams of alpha-linolenic acid. That is more than you would find in the same quantity of spinach, kale, or most other commonly consumed greens. Omega-3 fatty acids are considered important in human nutrition for their role in cardiovascular health, inflammation regulation, and neurological function. Most plant foods are poor sources. Purslane is a notable exception. Beyond omega-3s, purslane contains meaningful amounts of vitamin A, vitamin C, and several B vitamins. It is a good source of magnesium, calcium, and potassium. It contains glutathione, one of the more studied antioxidant compounds found in plant foods. And it contains beta-cyanins and beta-xanthins, the same pigment compounds responsible for the deep colors in beets, which researchers have studied for their antioxidant properties. Purslane also contains melatonin, a compound more commonly discussed in the context of sleep and circadian rhythm. The concentration in purslane is higher than in most other plant sources, though the significance of dietary melatonin from plants remains an active area of research. It is worth noting what purslane does not contain in significant quantities: oxalic acid. Many leafy greens, including spinach and chard, contain high levels of oxalate, a compound that can bind to minerals and reduce their absorption. Purslane's oxalate content is considerably lower, which may make its minerals more bioavailable than those in other greens. Purslane is not a medicine. It is not a supplement. It is food, with a nutritional profile that happens to be more complex and interesting than most of the vegetables that dominate modern supermarkets. So how does a plant with this nutritional profile, with this history, end up being classified as a weed in most of the English-speaking world? In other words, why did we all agree to call it a weed? The answer lies not in the plant, but in the system that grew up around it. Industrial agriculture is built around optimization. Crops are selected and refined over generations to perform well in specific conditions: uniform germination, predictable growth cycles, mechanical harvestability, long shelf life, resistance to bruising during transport. The plants that thrive in this system are not necessarily the most nutritious. They are the most convenient. Purslane fails several of these tests. It is small and grows low to the ground, which makes mechanical harvesting impractical without also harvesting soil and debris. Its leaves are delicate and succulent, which means they wilt quickly after cutting and do not travel well in refrigerated trucks over long distances. Its growing season is irregular, appearing when conditions favor it rather than when a planting schedule demands it. And it competes aggressively with cultivated crops, which meant that as monoculture farming expanded, purslane was reclassified from food to problem. The shift happened gradually over the 20th century. As supermarkets became the primary source of food for urban populations, the range of vegetables sold narrowed. The selection was driven not by nutrition, but by logistics. What could be grown at scale? What could be transported without spoiling? What would look appealing on a shelf under fluorescent lighting for 3 days? Purslane did not make that list. Iceberg lettuce did. This is not a story of suppression. No one banned purslane. No one decided that populations should not have access to it. It simply did not fit the emerging infrastructure, and so it was quietly left behind while the agricultural system moved in a different direction. The herbicide industry completed the reclassification. By the mid-20th century, chemical companies were producing broad-spectrum herbicides designed to kill broadleaf plants in agricultural fields. Purslane, being a broadleaf plant with a remarkable ability to regenerate from small stem fragments left in the soil, became a target. Farmers were told it was a weed. They treated it accordingly. And so a plant that had fed families across the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and Mexico for thousands of years found itself being sprayed with chemicals on American farms. But purslane, as it has always done, survived. In the 1980s and 1990s, a slow shift began in how some researchers and food writers were thinking about wild and weedy plants. Ethnobotanists documenting traditional food systems in Greece, Turkey, and Mexico found purslane being used exactly as it had been for centuries. Home cooks in immigrant communities across Europe and North America were still preparing it. Market vendors in Oaxaca and Istanbul were still selling it. The knowledge had not vanished. It had simply moved to places where the industrial food system had not yet reached. In the early 1990s, a nutritional scientist named Artemis Simopoulos published research on the fatty acid content of purslane that drew significant attention. Her work, conducted partly through analysis of purslane samples from Greek markets, helped quantify what traditional cultures had intuited through centuries of observation. This plant had something valuable to offer. The specific finding about omega-3 content reached a wider audience than most botanical research typically would, partly because omega-3s were becoming a topic of significant interest in nutritional science at the time. The research did not immediately change what appeared in supermarkets, but it did begin to shift the conversation among farmers, foragers, and food researchers who were looking at the broader question of why modern diets had narrowed so dramatically and what had been lost in that narrowing. For those who want to learn more about identifying purslane in the wild and understanding which overlooked plants have been part of traditional food systems, there is a practical guide available in the first link in the description. It covers identification, preparation, and the broader context of plants that have been used by communities across history. Today, purslane occupies a strange middle ground in the food world. In Turkey and Greece, it never left. Semizotu remains a common dish. In summer, purslane appears in local markets alongside tomatoes and cucumbers as a completely ordinary vegetable. There is no nostalgia attached to it. No one considers it unusual or ancient. It is simply food that grows in summer, the way squash does or eggplant does. In Mexico, verdolaga continues to be sold and cooked in regions where traditional food culture has remained strong. It appears in markets in Oaxaca, Guerrero, and Michoacán, often sold in small bundles by vendors who grow it in gardens or harvest it from the edges of cultivated fields. In parts of South and Southeast Asia, related species of purslane have never been reclassified as weeds at all. They are sold in wet markets, cooked into curries, and eaten as a common side dish without any particular attention being paid to their history or nutritional content. They are simply ordinary plants that people eat. In the United States and most of Western Europe, the relationship with purslane is more complicated. A small number of specialty farmers have begun growing cultivated varieties for sale to restaurants and farmers' markets. Chefs interested in foraged and wild foods have added it to menus. Urban foragers, working within the growing movement of people interested in identifying edible plants in cities, have written guides to locating and harvesting it. But in most American supermarkets, it remains absent. The same plant that grows without invitation in sidewalk cracks outside those supermarkets does not appear on the shelves inside them. There is a particular variety of purslane that has been developed specifically for cultivation. Portulaca oleracea var. Sativa, sometimes called golden purslane or garden purslane. It grows larger than the wild type, with broader leaves and a slightly more upright habit that makes harvesting easier. It has a milder, less acidic flavor than wild purslane, which some people find more appealing. Seed companies in Europe and North America have been selling cultivated purslane varieties for decades. It appears in heirloom seed catalogs. It grows in kitchen gardens in France and Italy, where it is sometimes used in the salad mix called mesclun. In these contexts, it requires no special knowledge or equipment. You plant it in summer, water it occasionally, and harvest the young leaves as you would any salad green. The plant's remarkable drought tolerance makes it particularly interesting to researchers and growers thinking about agriculture in a warming climate. As rainfall patterns shift and summer temperatures rise in regions that have historically grown cool season vegetables, the ability to produce a nutritious leafy green in heat and drought becomes more valuable. Purslane's CAM photosynthesis system, which evolved over millions of years in dry and arid environments, suddenly looks less like a botanical curiosity and more like an engineering solution. Several agricultural research programs have begun studying purslane not as a weed to be controlled, but as a potential crop to be developed. Researchers at universities in the United States, Europe, and the Middle East have published work on its water use efficiency, its nutritional profile under different growing conditions, and its potential as a commercial vegetable in climates where other greens struggle. The science is early. Commercial purslane farming at scale faces the same logistical challenges it always has, but the questions being asked are different than they were 50 years ago. There is something worth pausing on in all of this. Purslane did not change. The plant growing in sidewalk cracks today is the same plant that Pliny the Elder described, the same plant that was cooked in Persian kitchens 1,000 years ago, the same plant that Aztec communities in Mexico were eating before European contact. Its chemistry did not change. Its resilience did not change. Its flavor did not change. What changed was the framework through which it was seen. In food systems built around diversity and adaptability, purslane was food. In food systems built around monoculture and efficiency, it was a problem. The plant itself was neutral. It simply kept growing, as it always had, in whatever cracks and margins it could find. This is true of a number of plants that occupied similar positions in traditional food systems. Lamb's quarters, which grows as a weed across North America and Europe, was eaten as a green vegetable for centuries and has a nutritional profile comparable to spinach. Nettles, which most people in the English-speaking world know primarily as a source of painful stings, have been eaten across Northern Europe for as long as there are records of what people ate. Dandelions, perhaps the most universally despised garden weed in the United States, are eaten as a spring green across much of Europe, and were brought to North America deliberately by European settlers who considered them food. The reclassification of these plants as weeds happened gradually, over generations, as the food system narrowed, and the knowledge of how to use them stopped being transmitted. It was not a dramatic event. There was no announcement. The information simply stopped being taught, and the plants stopped being recognized as food, and within a generation or two, the knowledge had moved to the margins where it has been waiting ever since. For those interested in exploring these overlooked plants more systematically, the guide mentioned earlier in this film, available in the first link in the description, provides a practical starting point for understanding which plants in this category have the longest and most documented histories of use. What purslane offers is not a revolution in how we think about food. It does not propose to replace anything or solve anything. It is simply a plant with a long history and a useful set of characteristics that stopped being valued when the system around it changed. It grows in heat when other greens wilt. It requires no irrigation in conditions that would kill most vegetables. It appears voluntarily in disturbed soil, in the edges of fields, in the cracks of pavement, in gardens that have been left unattended. It has been doing this for millions of years, long before there were humans to observe it, and it will continue doing it long after the current agricultural system has evolved into whatever comes next. The people who used it understood something that is easy to overlook, that a plant capable of surviving where nothing else grows is not a problem. It is a resource. This understanding did not require scientific analysis or nutritional databases. It came from observation, from paying attention to what was growing, from recognizing that the natural world tends to produce things in proportion to their usefulness. A plant that returns season after season, that feeds itself, that asks for nothing and keeps producing anyway, earned its place in the diet through simple persistence. The knowledge of how to eat it, how to prepare it, how to recognize its best season and its best uses, that knowledge still exists. It lives in recipes passed between generations in Turkish and Mexican and Greek households. It lives in the notes of ethnobotanists who documented traditional food systems before they disappeared. It lives in the handful of farmers and market gardeners who grow cultivated varieties and sell them to customers who remember what to do with them. It also lives, uncultivated and unharvested, in the cracks of every sidewalk in every city in the temperate world. One plant, thousands of years. Almost no help required. The archive does not close because the knowledge went out of fashion. It simply waits, growing flat against the ground in the summer heat, for someone to look down and remember what they are seeing. If you want to keep exploring what the modern world set aside, subscribe to the Living Archive. Every episode, we open another chapter of what nature offered and what we chose to overlook.